rested against Arya's neck. Sitting on the bed, Arya stared at the man before her as he gripped a long sword. Pointing it at her, he said coldly, "Did you not hear what I said?" Arya looked at the scene before her in confusion. What on earth was going on? The blade pierced her skin, and blood ran down her neck. Fenrir held the sword pointed at her and demanded, "I'm asking you, who exactly are you?" Arya clutched the bedsheet beneath her. She couldn't make a sound. The icy blade pressed against her neck and shoulder, blood trailing from the wound. Looking at the man before her, her body refused to move. Fenrir stared at Arya and asked again, "Can you not hear me, Arya?" Why was the man in front of her holding a sword? Who was he? What had she done? Arya felt completely lost. Who was she? Arya opened her eyes. Her vision gradually blurred, and the man before her and the sword became unreal. The cry of a baby echoed through the room. Arya looked around. Where was this place? Two maids stood beside a cradle, looking at the two babies inside. The crying did not stop. A shrill scream tore through the silence of the corridor. The Marchioness covered her face and cried out, "No." The two maids stood nearby, utterly at a loss. Marquis Bertrand pushed open the door and rushed in, asking loudly what happened. Were the children born safely? A maid stammered in reply, "Yes, but—" Marquis Bertrand walked toward the cradle, his tone softening. "I see. The children must be adorable." He looked into the cradle. Then he froze. One of the babies in the cradle had black hair and was sleeping with her eyes closed. Black hair, a sinister omen. Terrifying. He turned to the maid and ordered, "Get rid of this child at once." Marquis Bertrand stopped the maid just as she was about to leave. "Wait." He looked at the black-haired infant in her arms, his gaze turning cold. "If she's to be disposed of anyway, then before that. But we might as well squeeze every last bit of value out of her." The maid holding the baby felt a chill run through her. Value? What was he talking about? Wasn't this their own child? The baby in the cradle remained asleep, utterly unaware of the fate awaiting her. Morning sunlight spilled onto the windowsill, and birdsong rang clear and sweet. Arya sat by the window, looking outside, lost in thought. A bucket of filthy water was dumped over her head. Arya fell to her knees on the floor, raising an arm to shield herself. Two maids stood there holding empty wooden buckets. "Oh my, you're covered in garbage now." One of them sneered, "You stink. It suits your black hair perfectly." Arya lowered her head and said nothing, letting the dirty water drip from her hair. From the other end of the corridor came a cheerful cry, "Father!" Young Alice came running through the flowers carrying an exquisite gift box. Marquis Bertrand smiled and replied, "Yes, my lovely daughter." The Marchioness followed behind, warning, "Alice, don't run so fast. It's dangerous." Hugging the gift box, Alice said, "I'm fine. Don't worry, Mother." Alice happily walked forward hand in hand with Marquis Bertrand and the Marchioness. "Thank you for giving me such a wonderful birthday present." Arya knelt in the shadows in the distance, watching the happy family, dirt smeared across her face and sorrow in her eyes. She lowered her head and looked at the floor. What was with this blatant discrimination? Could it really be just because of her black hair? Then a sharp slap rang out, and Arya's head snapped to the side, her hair falling into disarray. Marquis Bertrand pointed at Arya and roared, "You useless piece of trash." Why was Alice injured? Raising his hand high, he bellowed in fury. "The one who should have been hurt was you, not her." Another heavy slap struck Arya across the face, sending her sprawling to the side. Alice stood at a distance, looking at the girl lying on the ground, and let out a contemptuous laugh. "You're such garbage." A chill ran through Arya. How cruel. Had this child been suffering such abuse all this time? The scene changed again, and Arya found herself standing in the center of a lavish reception room. Looking at the family before her, Arya asked in disbelief, "You want me to go to the Imperial Palace in Lady Alice's place?" Alice set down the envelope in her hand and answered casually, "That's right. The royal family sent an envoy to take me there to become queen." She lifted her teacup and took an elegant sip. "You should be grateful. Thanks to me, you'll get to live a luxurious life in the palace, Arya." Marquis Bertrand smiled in satisfaction. "This way, our Bertrand family will be safe as well." Arya kept repeating the names in her mind. Arya, the Bertrand family. Those names felt strangely familiar. I feel like I've heard them somewhere before. Then she jolted awake. "That's it. I remember now. These names all came from that novel called Emerald, Embraced by the Hands of Fate. The Marchioness lifted her teacup. If you're going to be Alice's substitute, then make yourself useful. Arya stood there, stunned. Yes, that was it. Though it was hard to believe, this really was the world inside the novel. Hesitantly, she said, but my hair and eye color are completely different from Lady Alice's. Marquis Bertrand took out an exquisite purple jewelry box. Put this on, then look in the mirror. Inside the box lay a silver ring. Arya looked at it and understood. She picked it up and, under the watchful eyes of the Bertrand family, slowly walked to the mirror beside her. Arya slipped the ring onto her finger. Her long, ink-black hair began to fade from the roots, the color spreading rapidly until, in an instant, it turned to dazzling gold. Arya stared at the sight in shock. She lifted a strand of hair and looked at it in disbelief. It's gold. Marquis Bertrand looked pleased with the result and said proudly, I had this specially made by a skilled craftsman. Arya looked at the ring on her finger as her hair gradually returned to its original color. It had already changed back. In a stern tone, Marquis Bertrand ordered, You must wear it at all times. Listen carefully. Absolutely no one must discover that you are a substitute. Lowering her head, Arya replied, I understand. Marquis Bertrand continued outlining the plan. The scene shattered and reformed again. Fenrir asked coldly, Do you not intend to answer? Arya suddenly opened her eyes wide, jolting out of her memories and looking at the man right in front of her. She looked at the sword pressed to her throat. Though she still didn't understand everything, it seemed she had become Arya from the novel Emerald, Embraced by the Hands of Fate. Arya looked at the blade before her. Of all times, it had to be now. It had to be this exact opening scene from the novel. In that shocking part, on her wedding night, Arya was exposed as a substitute and executed on the spot. Blood stained the floor red, and also stained the novel that recorded that fate. What should I do? She thought amid the splashing blood. I have to say something, or I'll die right now. Fenrir tightened his grip on the sword hilt. If you continue to remain silent, I will regard you as a traitor and execute you. Arya stared at the blade before her, holding her breath in terror. Seeing that she still said nothing, Fenrir raised the sword. In that case, the blade came down with a sharp whistle through the air. At the brink of death, Arya shouted, Please wait. The blade stopped mere millimeters from her neck. The icy touch of the metal sent a shiver through her. Her voice trembling, Arya said, I am Arya Bertrand. Fenrir looked at the girl before him as her once brilliant golden hair rapidly faded, black as ink spreading out from the roots. Shock crossed his face. Meeting his gaze directly, Arya said, I came here to marry your majesty in place of my twin sister. Fenrir silently stared at her. Arya collapsed to the floor, the sword still pointed at her. She closed her eyes and waited for whatever fate would come next. Fenrir sheathed his sword. I see. Fenrir reached out, grabbed her by the hair, and pulled her toward him. Forced to meet his eyes, Arya let out a short gasp. Fenrir released her hair, and the strands slipped through his fingers. Arya sat on the bed and watched him walk toward the door. Fenrir stopped and said, Tomorrow morning, I'll send someone to treat your wound. Fenrir reached the door. We'll talk again tomorrow. He walked out, and the door shut in front of Arya. Alone on the huge bed, she stared at the closed door. Arya fell back onto the bed. Thank goodness. She reached up to touch the wound on her neck. It hurt. She looked at the ceiling. At least for now, she was out of danger, right? Then she turned toward the window and the pitch-black night outside. If this was a dream, she hoped that when she woke up tomorrow morning, she would already be back in reality. Morning sunlight poured over the magnificent building. Arya opened her eyes and let out a groan. Lying in bed, Arya realized it wasn't a dream. Barefoot, she stepped onto the floor, walked to the dressing table, and picked up a mirror. The girl in the mirror had long black hair and violet eyes. On her neck was still the wound left by yesterday's sword. Looking at her reflection, Arya murmured, I really have become Arya. She sat down on the sofa and looked at the jewelry box on the table. It bore the crest of the Kingdom of Blanchard, exactly as described in the novel. Arya fell into thought. Why had she come into the world of a novel? Had she really already died? She didn't know. She couldn't remember what had happened before she came here. But in those fragmented memories, Arya had been abused, used, and in the end died heartbroken. She lowered her head and looked at her hands. Since I become Arya, I absolutely won't let that tragedy happen again. If things continued like this, she might be killed. And the original Arya had been far too pitiful. Since I've already lived a few more lines than in the novel, then I'll prove that I still have value in staying alive. A knock came at the door. From outside, Lisa asked, Your Highness, have you awakened? Arya looked into the mirror. Her hair had turned golden again. Yes. Lisa pushed open the door and entered. Good morning. I am Lisa, the maid assigned to attend to your highness. I will serve you with all my heart. Arya looked at Lisa and said, Lisa, I look forward to working with you too. Lisa bowed slightly. Forgive me for saying so, your highness, but there is no need for you to be so polite to me. Arya smiled. Understood. Looking at herself in the mirror, she thought, this feels unfamiliar, but I have to be careful. I must not arouse suspicion. As Lisa arranged medicine and bandages on the tray, she said, without further delay, I'll treat your wound and help you prepare. After breakfast, I will escort you to His Majesty Fenrir's office. Arya froze. In a low voice, she answered, all right. Looking at herself in the mirror, she thought, that's right. He said he'd hear my explanation today. Arya clenched her skirt. I have to pull myself together. For Arya and for myself. To survive. Arya changed into a magnificent purple dress. Standing before the mirror, her gaze grew resolute. Lisa accompanied her down the wide corridor. Walking silently behind Lisa, Arya recalled the image of a sword pressed to her throat the night before. I'm so scared, just thinking about facing that sword again. But if I stop here, I'll never be able to find happiness. Arya clenched her skirt tighter. Her eyes hardened with resolve. Lisa stopped in front of a towering door and gestured to the side. This way, please. Arya looked at the tightly shut doors and took a deep breath. Lisa knocked and said, Your Majesty, I have brought Her Highness the Princess Consort. A low voice came from inside. Send her in. The heavy doors slowly opened. Arya stepped into the office and saw Fenrir seated behind his desk. Looking at her, he said, You've come, Arya. Bertrand. Arya stopped and quietly looked at him. Leaning back in his chair, Fenrir stared at her with a sharp gaze and said, Tell me everything you know. Resting his cheek on one hand, he added all of it. Looking at him, Arya felt immense pressure. If she really told him everything truthfully, would he still let her live? There was no guarantee of that at all. A little impatient, Fenrir asked, How long do you intend to keep me waiting? Staring at Arya, he continued, Speak within 3 seconds. 3, 2. Startled, Arya blurted out, Yes, your majesty. Arya lowered her head, trying to calm the panic in her heart. I have to steady myself. Right now, I am Arya. Lies and excuses probably won't work on him, though I don't want to remember Arya's memories at all. Arya took a deep breath. I will tell you everything I know. Fenrir sat elegantly on the sofa, carrying an air that allowed no objection. He waited in silence. Arya began, sitting on the sofa. I was born in the house of Marquis Bertrand, one of twin daughters. However, no one was happy about my birth. No one celebrated it. Young Arya scrubbed the walls of a dim corridor with a rag in hand. Dressed in rough servant's clothes, she worked clumsily, shrinking back against the wall in fear. A door at the end of the corridor opened. The Marchioness came out and laughed mockingly. Hurry up and work. Then, after seeing the figure in the hall clearly, she shrieked, Why are you here? The Marchioness rushed forward and shoved Arya to the ground. Don't show that disgusting black hair of yours to the world. Marquis Bertrand swung a heavy stick and struck young Arya hard, roaring furiously. How many times do I have to tell you? Curled up on the cold floor, Arya endured blow after blow. She let out a cry of pain and could only lie there helplessly. Alice stood not far away, holding a pair of sharp scissors. Looking at Arya on the ground, she said, My poor sister, why don't we just cut your hair short? Alice added, Maybe if we cut it off, golden hair will grow in. Alice grabbed Arya's long hair and began snipping. Black strands fluttered down in clumps. Mocking her, Alice said, Black hair is just too filthy, as she burst into laughter. How lovely. Doesn't this suit you perfectly? Arya kept her head lowered, her messy short hair hiding her expression. She silently endured it all. Arya scrubbed clothes hard in a wooden wash basin. She stopped, scooped up cold water, and splashed it on her face, trying to clear her mind. Carrying a heavy basket of laundry, she walked to the back courtyard, where several maids were hanging bedsheets. Arya stumbled between the white sheets. 2 maids stood nearby watching her, laughing maliciously. Arya's foot slipped, and she pitched forward. The basket in her arms rolled onto the ground, and the freshly washed clothes scattered into the mud. One maid covered her mouth and laughed. Oh dear, how terrible. We'll have to wash them all over again. Kneeling in the mud, Arya was surrounded by the maids' piercing laughter. Ever since I was very young, I was abused without end. I shut my heart away and lived like a doll. No matter how I cried, no matter how much I hated everything, No matter how I begged them to stop, nothing changed. The Marchioness looked at the letter in her hand and gasped. Alice is to become a candidate for queen? Marquis Bertrand held a letter stamped with the royal seal and said, "It has been officially decided." The Marchioness looked flustered. "Oh, what are we going to do? I heard His Majesty Fenrir is a cruel tyrant." Turning away, Marquis Bertrand said, "This is a request from the royal family. For the sake of the Bertrand house, we cannot refuse." Waving her hands, the Marchioness cried, "Just thinking of my precious daughter becoming unhappy is unbearable." "No." Marquis Bertrand smiled slyly. "If we use that item, perhaps things will turn in our favor." Seated behind his desk, he said, "Cheer up. I have a task for you." Arya listened expressionlessly, with no ripple in her heart. Looking at the man across from her, Arya said, "That's what happened, all the way up until today." Sitting on the sofa, Fenrir asked, "So that's all?" Arya nodded. "Yes, that's all." Fenrir fell silent, examining the Arya before him. The Bertrand family's actions already amounted to an insult to the royal family. They refused to fulfill the marriage contract simply because they doted on their own daughter. Was that truly the only reason? An old book lay scattered in darkness, its pages yellowed with age. It should have been written in the novel, but I can't remember it. Arya looked ahead solemnly. Sitting on the sofa, Fenrir said, "I understand now. You're merely a substitute." Arya looked at him and gave a small gasp. Then she let out a breath of relief, folding her hands over her chest. Resting his chin on one hand, Fenrir looked at Arya and said, "Sending a substitute to become queen is utter madness." He pushed open the window, walked onto the balcony, and looked down at the courtyard below. Standing at the balcony's edge, Fenrir turned to look back into the room, his expression cold. He remained there in silence, gazing into the distance. Then he turned back, his eyes deep and unreadable. Arya sat alone in the spacious, luxurious room. Looking small, Fenrir stepped back inside from the balcony and looked at her. He walked toward Arya and stopped. Naturally, one can predict this much. Sitting on the sofa, Arya looked up at him. Standing before her, Fenrir said, "There must be some kind of conspiracy hidden in all this." He bent down and gripped Arya's chin, forcing her to raise her head. Staring in her eyes, he said, "Arya Bertrand." Arya said nothing. Fenrir continued, "Your true identity must remain secret from everyone but me." Arya gave a startled gasp. What did that mean? Did he want to see how the Bertrand family would react? With Fenrir's fingers still at her chin, Arya obediently replied, "Understood. I will do as you say." Leaning close to her ear, Fenrir said, "And one more thing." Arya looked at him, waiting for the rest. In a low voice beside her ear, he said, "Until I order otherwise, you are no longer Arya Bertrand. You will live as Alice Blanchard." Lowering her eyes, Arya answered, "Yes, I understand." Straightening up, Fenrir continued, "That said, even if you're only a substitute, can you truly fulfill the duties of queen?" Arya looked troubled. "As for that, I barely remember ever being taught such things." She fell into thought. Since they wanted me to act as a substitute, they should at least have taught me some etiquette first. If I fail, who knows what they'll do to me? It could even be... The flash of a guillotine crossed her mind. Arya suddenly snapped back to herself, growing even more uneasy. Releasing her, Fenrir sat back down on the sofa. "You will undergo training befitting queen." Arya stood frozen, her mind reeling. Queenly education? You've got to be kidding. A wave of gloom hit her. "I hate studying, and now I have to go through queen training?" Fenrir noticed her reaction. "Your expression has been strange for some time now. Do you object to my arrangement?" Arya hurriedly shook her head. "No, not at all, your majesty." Fenrir rose to his feet. "We've only just married, although there is much official business to be handled. For now, you need only make the minimum necessary public appearances." Arya lowered her head, thinking to herself, "Does my expression really look that strange?" But to avoid the worst outcome, I have no choice. Looking down at her, Fenrir continued, "If you already feel relieved, isn't that a bit premature? I will assign you a tutor, but if you fail to produce results, that you will bear the consequences." Forcing out a smile, Arya replied, "I understand." Inside, she screamed, "This guy is a complete devil." Fenrir paused and said, "One more thing. You said you were instructed to send a letter, correct?" Arya replied, "Yes." Fenrir said coldly, "If your identity as the substitute has not been exposed, then you are to observe the situation first and act afterward." Is that what they meant? Arrogant to the extreme. Arya remained silent. Turning away, Fenrir ordered, "Do not send anything yet. We will see how the other side intends to move." In a low voice, Arya answered yes. Fenrir began to walk away. "That will be all." Arya respectfully replied, "Yes. Please take care." After Finra left, Arya stood alone in the empty room, lowering her head and complaining inwardly. He says it so easily. When the time comes, the one who'll be scolded by my parents is me. The door softly closed. Alone in the splendid bedchamber, Arya looked at the shut doors and thought, at least for now, I won't be sent to the guillotine. But she did not relax her guard. Lowering her head, she thought, I absolutely cannot let down my guard. From now on, I have to work even harder than before. Yet despite her resolve, reality was far crueler than she had imagined. The so-called queenly education was far harsher than she had expected. Under the stern gaze of her tutor, Arya was forced to learn all manner of tedious etiquette. She sat before mountains of books, memorizing dull knowledge day and night. Even late into the night, she remained hunched over her desk in the flickering candlelight, persisting in exhaustion. Several weeks passed in the blink of an eye. At last, Arya finished the thick stack of documents in her hands. She sat at her desk while Lisa waited beside her. Pressing a hand to her forehead, Arya muttered, besides the formal queen's education, I also have to deal with all this official work. My head is about to explode. She picked up the little bell on the desk and shook it lightly. A clear chime echoed through the room. A knock came from outside, and an official in a black uniform entered. Arya handed him the organized documents and said, "Take these." After he accepted them, she continued, "I've made a brief summary based on the key points, and I've also added notes to the parts that need revision. Please review those as well." The official replied respectfully, "Understood. Thank you for your consideration, Your Highness." Arya looked at Lisa beside her and asked, "Lisa, aren't you tired too? Let's have some tea." Exquisite cakes and black tea were set upon the table. Lisa smiled. "Of course. It would be my honor to have tea with you." Sunlight streamed into the grand palace corridor. Fenrir walked side by side with an official holding documents, who reported, according to the tutor's feedback, Her Majesty has been extremely diligent in her studies, and her understanding is excellent as well. Hearing the report, Fenrir looked ahead thoughtfully. The official continued, "In addition, Her Majesty handles official duties with great efficiency and is also very considerate toward the servants. That is the substance of the reports I have received." Fenrir remained silent, his gaze unreadable. The official carefully asked, "Your Majesty?" Fenrir looked at the report in his hands. Diligence was certainly praiseworthy, but wasn't she pushing herself too hard? Arya smiled and said, "I'm fine. I have so much to do. Complaining won't make any of it go faster." Fenrir watched her with a complicated expression. In a flat tone, he said, "That much is only natural. I merely assigned her some relatively simple duties." The official followed behind him, clutching the documents. "But at this rate, she'll collapse from exhaustion sooner or later, won't she?" In Fenrir's mind appeared Arya's bright smile. Even so, she was completely different from that woman who only knew how to cry. The weak figure from his memories, weeping with her face hidden in shadow, overlapped with the girl before him, then separated again. Fenrir withdrew his thoughts and said coldly, "Then let's see just how long she can hold out." The official asked in confusion, "Your Majesty?" Fenrir looked away. "Gulme." Hugging the documents, the official hurried after him. "Yes, sire." Fenrir walked through the corridor. In the distance were the figures of Arya and Lisa walking side by side. With a cold expression, he silently withdrew his gaze. In her room, Alice walked alone to the table and looked at the glistening grapes on the plate. She picked one up and put it in her mouth, then let out a long sigh and slumped into an ornate armchair, complaining helplessly, "Staying in this room all the time is so boring." Alice sat before the dressing mirror, looking at herself in it. "I wonder how Arya is handling things now," she thought. "Even if she can wear a face exactly like mine, that gloomy personality of hers can never be changed. Has she already been killed? If so, then she really is a useless piece of trash." Alice picked up a grape and popped it in her mouth. "If you're still alive, you should at least send me a letter." She crushed the grape in her hand, its juice running between her fingers. Softly, Alice murmured, "Sister Arya." Arya asked in surprise, "Attend the diplomatic conference?" Sitting behind his desk, Fenrir looked at her. "You seem surprised." Fenrir continued, "You haven't forgotten your official duties, have you?" Arya quickly replied, "No, of course not. The envoys from the Kingdom of Martell are staying here for diplomatic negotiations, correct?" Turning his face slightly, Fenrir replied, "That's right." Arya fell silent. Looking at her, Fenrir said, "As part of your duties, you only need to attend the greetings on the first and last day." Arya replied, "Understood." Fenrir asked, "This is your first time attending a diplomatic occasion, isn't it?" Arya answered, "Yes." Fenrir stepped closer and said, "This is a chance to display the results of your royal education." Somevat Stifli, Arya replied, I will do my best." Inside, she cried, "Don't pressure me like that. It'll only make me more nervous." Fenrir's expression turned serious. "Lately, I've been hearing certain rumors. As expected of the only daughter of the highly esteemed Bertrand family." He watched her steadily. Forcing a smile, Arya replied, "I'm deeply honored by your praise." Inwardly, she muttered, "He's being sarcastic now? What is wrong with him?" Seated behind his desk, Fenrir said, "That is all. You may go." Arya bowed. "Yes." She turned and left the room. "Excuse me." As she walked down the corridor, Arya fell into thought. Come to think of it, the Kingdom of Martell. I remember it appeared in the novel. Though it was a small country, it was one of the main producers of steel. Its smelting techniques were highly advanced, and it exported steel armor and weapons. Arya stopped walking. What was it again? I remember. It was a very important country. Arya stopped, turned around, and looked back at Fenrir. Your Majesty." Fenrir was looking down over documents and did not reply immediately. Arya continued, "If it wouldn't be too much trouble, may I also attend a meeting with the ambassador?" Fenrir set down the document in his hand. "Oh, give me a reason." Arya explained, "The Kingdom of Martell is an important ally. Since they are our envoys, they ought to be treated as state guests. So I would like to hear their thoughts and deepen the relationship between our two countries." Fenrir silently stared at Arya, avoiding his gaze. She thought uneasily, "Did I say something unnecessary?" Fenrir lowered his eyes and replied, "Very well. I will prepare a seat for you as well." Smiling, Arya said, "Thank you very much." Lifting her skirt slightly, she bowed. "Then, if you'll excuse me." Arya turned and left the room, the door closing behind her. Fenrir sat alone at his desk with his hands clasped under his chin, deep in thought. Although we have indeed formed an alliance with the Kingdom of Martell, the relationship between us is nowhere near that deep. Leaning back in his chair, Fenrir held a letter in his hand. Martell's territory and economy are both small. It is difficult to classify it as a high-priority nation, but he opened the envelope and fell into thought. Arya sat at the desk in the study as a servant standing beside her said, "Then I will put these away for you first, Your Highness." Lisa entered carrying a tea tray. "Your Highness, I have prepared some tea for you." Arya looked at her and replied, "Thank you, Lisa." Lisa gently set down the teacup. Arya picked it up and looked at the clear tea inside. She took a sip, sweet and delicious. Lisa smiled at her. "You looked very tired, so I added a little extra sugar." In her heart, Arya sighed. Lisa is an angel, completely unlike someone else. In her mind appeared the bizarre image of Fenrir wearing a maid outfit and serving tea. No, absolutely not. I don't even have the courage to drink tea made by that man. Even if he really brewed it, I wouldn't dare touch it. Arya shook her head. "I can't believe I imagined something so unpleasant." Looking at Lisa, she said, "Thank you, Lisa." Holding the teacup, Arya continued, "I really am tired, but this is actually interesting." Lisa asked in surprise, "Huh?" Arya sat at the desk flipping through documents as she said, "Doing this work lets me hear people's voices up close. It makes me happy. It makes me feel like I'm someone useful." Looking at her, Lisa softly said, "Your Highness." Arya lowered her head and continued handling official business. "Maybe I should work a little harder." At her side, Lisa gently advised, "Please don't push yourself too much." Arya stopped her pen and looked up at Lisa. Then, as if suddenly remembering something, she froze. Arya slammed her hand onto the documents on the desk. "I remember now. In the latter half of the novel, a coup broke out in the Kingdom of Blanchard, and the key to preparing for the war was the smelting technology of the Kingdom of Martell. I'm certain of it." Arya's face grew grave. Could it be that the ones who launched the coup were the Bertrand family? She clenched the seal tightly in her hand. How frustrating. I can't remember any more of the details. Night fell. A shadow appeared before the gates of the estate. Sitting at her desk, Arya thought there should have been other characters too. Pressing a hand to her forehead, she thought, "No, I can't remember it all. I only bought that novel because the cover was attractive. To be honest, the plot wasn't really my kind of story. The only thing that left a deep impression on me was the very beginning, the scene where Arya was killed. Arya sighed. Worrying about this now won't help. Sitting at the desk, documents in hand, she thought, at the very least, if the Kingdom of Blanchard and the Kingdom of Martell can maintain good relations, it should have a positive effect. Dipping the tip of her pen into the ink bottle, Arya thought, I don't know what the right answer is, but all I can do is fulfill my duty as princess consort. Late at night, Fenrir sat alone in a dim room, his robe hanging open as he leaned back in his chair. He sat there in silence, replaying in his mind what Arya had said earlier that day. The Kingdom of Martell is an important ally. Since they are envoys, they ought to be treated as state guests. I would very much like to hear their thoughts and deepen the relationship between our two countries. Fenrir's eyes were cold. The way she spoke still bothers me, he thought, looking at the wine swirling in his cup. For now, the possibility that the woman is involved in the Bertrand family's conspiracy cannot be ruled out. Tightening his grip on the glass, he wondered whether he should cancel the plan to let her attend the meeting. A cold smile curled at Fenrir's lips. No matter the outcome, I can handle it. He raised the glass. If she makes any suspicious move, then at that time. In the splendid reception room, Fenrir sat on a sofa, looking through documents. Looking at the materials in his hand, Fenrir said, I see. So what you want is to exchange Martell's steel smelting technology for technical cooperation from our country in magic stone production. Is that correct? The envoy replied respectfully, That is correct, Your Majesty. With your nation's assistance, we can achieve higher quality refinement of weapon-grade steel. We also take great pride in our country's advanced processing techniques, whether for weapons or armor. If we join hands with a nation as technologically advanced as yours, it will surely benefit both of us greatly. Fenrir said nothing and continued examining the papers in his hand. Sitting nearby, Arya silently observed the negotiation. The envoy continued, Furthermore, your country also intends to sell the resulting high-quality processed products to other nations, does it not? After all, that is our principal industry. Fenrir stopped moving. Beside him, Arya showed a surprised expression. Looking at the envoy, Fenrir said, You are like a mirror, changing your appearance according to the person standing before you. The envoy smiled and replied, What a mirror reflects is truth. If the image reflected in your majesty's eyes appears distorted, would that not simply be the true form of the one being reflected? Fenrir stared at the envoy in silence, his gaze sharpening. The atmosphere in the reception room instantly dropped to freezing. Uneasily, Arya looked at the two men. Fenrir placed a hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist. Arya noticed the movement, her expression turning tense. Fenrir said, Steel is heavy and difficult to control. However, Fenrir rose to his feet and drew the sword at his waist. Once struck, it changes shape. The envoy collapsed back onto the sofa in terror, staring at the blade before him. Arya suddenly stood and rushed to Fenrir's side, both hands tightly gripping the arm with which he held the sword. Fenrir stopped. Looking at him, Arya said, Your Majesty, please allow me. Fenrir turned his head slightly. What is it? Looking at him, Arya said, I have heard that the southwestern region of Martell is suffering from famine and is in a very difficult situation. She continued, if this cooperation could help ease the disaster there, then perhaps that would be a good thing as well. Fenrir looked at Arya in silence. She went on, His Majesty the King of Martell and Your Excellency the Envoy must both wish to strengthen your country and protect your people. That feeling is surely genuine. When you spoke of not being satisfied with the present and seeking further technological innovation, I could feel your great passion for steelmaking. The envoy looked at Arya in surprise. Your Majesty. Arya turned to Fenrir and asked, Your Majesty, do you not carry that same wish in your heart to protect your people? Fenrir remained silent. Inwardly, Arya thought, I remember there really was a scene like this in the novel. His feelings should be just as I remember. Arya looked back at the ambassador and said, That may be true, but our country's technology is also extremely valuable. You will, of course, give it the proper consideration, won't you? Sweating nervously, the ambassador replied, Why, yes, of course. Nodding repeatedly, he continued, If you are willing to assist us, then aside from exports to other nations, we intend to give Brankel and Charles absolute priority. In both quality and quantity, they will come first. Fenrir silently stroked his chin while Arya watched him anxiously from the side. I don't remember all the details, but we were supposed to maintain friendly relations with Martell. Please, don't refuse this offer. Fenrir sat back down on the sofa. Go draft the agreement. The specific terms and product details can be decided later, Arya. Arya looked stunned. The ambassador also froze in place. Both of them stared at Fenrir in disbelief. Looking at the ambassador, Fenrir said, "If your nation's technology were to decline like this, that would indeed be regrettable." The ambassador, greatly relieved, bowed deeply and replied, "We will surely turn this into prosperity for our country." Fenrir answered calmly, "Naturally." Standing at the side, Arya finally let out the breath she had been holding. Thank goodness. When he suddenly started mocking them, I thought everything was going to fall apart. That was the most nerve-wracking moment of my life. The ambassador hurried over to Arya and cried out excitedly, "Your Majesty the Queen, I never imagined you would care even about the most remote corners of our country. As expected of the Queen of a great nation. This kindness, we will never forget it." Arya looked flustered as the ambassador kept bowing. "And no, please don't do that. Please raise your head." Fenrir thought to himself, so she knows about the famine in Martell. Even so, that ambassador had originally intended to negotiate in a way that was entirely favorable to his own country. If I had forced things through and secured an agreement that brought them no benefit whatsoever, that would have been easy enough. But this woman, Fenrir watched Arya's back. Though her methods differ from mine, she managed to secure enormous gains for Brankel while arriving at the same result. As Fenrir looked at Arya, he thought, I can't remember the last time something was resolved this peacefully. Most people either tremble in front of me or do nothing but flatter me. With people like that, I've always believed pressure was the fastest way to solve things. Yet that method always reminds me of my former self. It is not a pleasant feeling. Fenrir watched Arya speaking with the envoy. Perhaps it isn't so bad for things to end in such a satisfactory way. Back in her room, Arya threw herself onto the soft bed. I'm exhausted, but it's the pleasant kind of exhaustion. Maybe this is what accomplishment feels like, Arya. She closed her eyes. Or maybe I'm just relieved that I survived. There was a sound at the door. Arya sat up and looked toward it. Lisa. The door opened, and Arya stared in surprise as Fenrir walked in. I'm coming in. He strode past her without hesitation. Arya remained where she was, watching him head toward the sofa in the center of the room. Fenrir sat down, and Arya asked awkwardly, may I ask what this is about? Looking at her, Fenrir said, "You did very well in the meeting earlier. Thanks to you, we now have the foundation to place ourselves in an advantageous position." Arya froze. Is he praising me? Is he sincerely complimenting me? Or is there some hidden meaning behind it? Arya answered stiffly, thank you very much. If I was able to help, then it was my honor. Leaning back against the sofa, Fenrir said, "Now that I think about it, you have cared deeply about Martell from the very beginning. Even if you were receiving training as queen, it is hard to believe you would commit yourself so firmly based only on surface-level knowledge." Arya's heart skipped a beat. Oh no, the reason I thought Martell was important was because I remember the plot from the novel. Did I look too eager and make him suspicious? Arya hurriedly explained, and no, it's not like that. Lately, I've been studying Brankel's foreign policy, especially the parts concerning Martell. I even asked the servants to help gather some information about Martell for me. Arya lowered her head. Even though I promised not to interfere with your decisions, I still couldn't help speaking up in the end. I'm very sorry. Inwardly, she prayed, "Please don't ask any more questions." Looking at her, Fenrir said, "Raise your head." Arya paused, then slowly lifted her head to look at him. Leaning back, Fenrir said, "As queen, you still have many things you need to learn, but you possess a perspective that I do not. From now on, continue to handle matters with that same resolve." Arya was stunned. Looking at Fenrir, she noticed his expression had softened. There was the faintest trace of a smile at the corner of his lips. Flustered, she replied, "Why, yes, I understand." Fenrir walked toward the door. "Then I'll see you tomorrow." Arya was still lost in her shock. Was that man just smiling? In a dim room, Alice paced back and forth irritably, the hem of her skirt swaying with her hurried footsteps. Overturned gift boxes and scattered odds and ends littered the floor. Stopping abruptly, Alice shouted, "Why haven't we received a single message even now?" Her parents stood to the side, watching her with grave expressions. Alice continued, "There's been absolutely no movement from the palace either." The Marchioness spoke in an attempt to soothe her. "It's only been a few weeks. Be patient and wait a little longer." Suddenly, Alice swept her hand toward a nearby vase. It crashed heavily to the floor, shards and water splashing everywhere. Brilliant roses scattered across the wet floorboards. The Marchioness cried out, while Marquis Bertrand pressed a hand to his forehead and let out a long, pained sigh. Looking at her parents, Alice said, "If that woman gets killed while using the name Alice, I won't be able to stay in this house either." "How can you act so?" Unconcerned, Marquis Bertrand replied, "Since no bad news has come, that thing must be handling things well enough." The Marchioness nodded in agreement. "That's right. As long as she hasn't been beheaded, there's no problem." Turning toward the door, Marquis Bertrand warned, "Do not do anything foolish." Alice stood still, watching her parents leave the room and shut the door behind them. "Don't you feel anything at all, seeing your own daughter forced to stay locked in her room?" Stepping over the shattered vase, Alice cursed inwardly. It's all because that thing still hasn't sent back a single word. Standing alone in the empty room, she thought, "Father, Mother, what on earth are you thinking?" Alice walked to the window and pulled open the heavy curtains. That thing really is a useless doll. Looking at her reflection in the glass, she thought, "Perhaps it's time for me to lend a hand myself." A few days after the meeting ended, the delegation from the Kingdom of Martel prepared to return home. Standing in the Great Hall, Arius said, "Your visit has also been deeply meaningful to our nation." The envoy bowed and replied, "The honor is mine." Arya continued, "I wish you a safe journey. I sincerely hope this visit will promote friendship and prosperity between our two countries." Sitting nearby in silence, Fenrir watched Arya. "To be honest, I thought it would be enough if she simply managed not to make any mistakes, but she has performed remarkably well." Arya looked toward Fenrir and asked, "Your Majesty, is something wrong?" Coming back to himself, Fenrir replied, "No, it's nothing." Looking at the two of them, the envoy said, "No wonder your Majesty was drawn to such an excellent queen. The two of you seem to be very close. I will report to my king that Brankel's future is in very good hands." Fenrir replied, "There is no need to report such unnecessary details." A faint stir ran through the hall. The attendants murmured quietly among themselves, "Did you see the look on His Majesty Fenrir's face just now? It's my first time seeing him with such an awkward expression." Arya smiled politely ahead, but inwardly she thought, "He must just be evaluating me, judging whether I'm performing properly as queen." In the bedchamber, Lisa combed Arya's long hair and said, "Everyone in the palace has been saying that the way His Majesty looks at you lately has grown gentler." Arya blinked. "Really?" She recalled Fenrir's earlier words. "I'll assign a tutor to you, but if you fail to show results." Arya thought, "I don't remember him ever looking at me that way." To other people, does that really count as a gentle look? Lisa continued, "A few days ago, His Majesty even accepted your opinion. That's truly rare for him. Everyone is very excited. Some people are even whispering that there will soon be an heir." Arya exclaimed, "What? That's a bit." She thought, "Those rumors have already spread outside the palace? Then they've probably reached the Bertrand family by now." Their faces rose in her mind. If they heard those rumors, especially Alice, she would be furious. Arya fell silent. Lisa stopped what she was doing and asked, "You look rather pale. Are you all right? This is the first time you've had to handle so many official duties. I'm worried you may be too tired." Arya replied, "No, I'm fine." "Thank you for your concern, Lisa." Setting down the comb, Lisa said, "Please don't push yourself too hard. I'll go choose your clothes." Arya thought, she's right. Maybe the fatigue really is starting to pile up. Besides the matter of the Kingdom of Martel, there are still so many things I don't remember and don't understand. Arya looked at herself in the mirror. "I can't rest now. Absolutely not." Alice shouted angrily, "What the hell is going on?" She suddenly swung the quill in her hand and stabbed it viciously into the pillow on the bed. Feathers flew everywhere. Alice ground her teeth in thought. That useless thing hasn't sent back a single word, and yet she's living comfortably as the queen. She slashed again, ripping the pillow to shreds. That worthless girl. Who does she think she is? I suppose the answer is queen. Alice stopped moving. What on earth happened? Wasn't His Majesty supposed to be terrifying? There was a knock at the door. "Alice, I'm coming in." The door opened, and the Marchioness entered the room. Seeing feathers drifting all around, she frowned in disgust. With a sigh, the Marchioness said, "Oh dear, throwing another tantrum, are we? You need a change of scenery." Leaning against the bed, Alice said nothing. The Marchioness continued, "We're going to the Gautier estate. Go get ready at once." In a low voice, Alice asked, "Grandfather's house?" The Marchioness replied, "Yes. I want to hear your grandfather's opinion on this matter." Alice suddenly spun around and shouted, "Has there been any news from that girl? Or still nothing at all? You've heard the rumors too, haven't you? Apparently she's so busy playing the loving wife with His Majesty that she doesn't even have time to pay any attention to us." The Marchioness was startled by Alice's agitation. Alice fell silent, her face dark. The Marchioness urged, "Enough. Hurry and prepare yourself. And don't forget to bring your magic item." Alice shouted, "I already know that." The Marchioness turned and left, shutting the door behind her. Alice was left alone in the room, silent. She rose and walked to the dressing table, picking up the black magical tool. Alice stared wordlessly at the jewelry box in her hand. When she opened it, a ring set with a blue gemstone lay quietly inside. A faint aura radiated from the ring. Alice closed her eyes, her expression dark. Alice looked at herself in the mirror and thought, "She's nothing more than my cheap substitute. She should hurry up, surrender the throne, and die in some forgotten corner." Grabbing her own hair, Alice ground her teeth. "I'm the only true golden-haired Alice here." In the palace office, Arya sat at her desk handling documents while Lisa stood nearby. Suddenly, Arya stopped. The hand holding her quill trembled slightly, leaving a streak of ink across the page. Arya pressed a hand to her forehead as a sharp pain hit her. Lisa looked at her worriedly and said, "Your Majesty the Queen, you look especially pale today. Perhaps you should rest for a while." Arya answered weakly, "Thank you. You're right. I think I should lie down for a bit." Arya tried to stand, bracing her hands on the desk, but her fingertips were trembling. The scene before her eyes began to warp. Her consciousness blurred. Arya let out a faint sound. A wave of dizziness washed over her. Her body lost its balance and fell backward. Lisa cried out in alarm. Arya collapsed to the floor, completely losing consciousness. Documents scattered from the desk. Like a marionette with its strings cut, Arya lay sprawled on the floor. Lisa screamed in terror. "Someone help! Help! Her Majesty the Queen has fainted." Arya lay motionless among the scattered papers, sunken in a deep unconsciousness. Footsteps echoed through the empty corridor. Fenrir walked toward a tightly shut door. Stopping in front of it, he pushed it open. The room was dimly lit. Arya lay on the large bed, while Ian stood watch at her bedside. Entering the room, Fenrir said, "You may leave." Ian bowed and replied, "Yes, Your Majesty. I take my leave." The door was shut gently behind him. Fenrir sat down in the armchair beside the bed and looked at Arya lying there. He sank into thought. Arya's eyes were closed. Fenrir gazed at her, recalling how she usually carried herself. Even when handling official affairs, she was always composed and dignified, never showing the slightest sign of exhaustion. Arya stood before a mirror, adjusting an ornate dress. Turning toward the steward beside her, she smiled. Fenrir looked at his own hand. "No, I only met with them when necessary, and only said what was necessary. They couldn't have noticed anything." He suddenly came back to himself. "What was I just thinking? Am I worried?" Sitting beside the bed, he silently watched the sleeping Arya. Arya let out a light murmur and turned over without waking. She lay quietly against the pillow, a ring gleaming faintly on her finger in the dim room. Fenrir reached out and took Arya's hand. So cold, and these hands are so slender. Watching her sleeping face, he thought, even if I have my doubts, perhaps I have been too harsh. The room was silent. As he held her hand, for some reason it felt warm. In her sleep, Arya gave a small groan and slowly opened her eyes. Her vision gradually cleared. She saw a blurred figure sitting by the bed, tightly holding her hand. In a low voice, Arya murmured, "Who?" Then she abruptly realized something was wrong and immediately pulled her hand back. Seeing clearly who it was, Arya gasped, "Your Majesty." She sat up too quickly. Because of the sudden movement, Arya pressed a hand to her forehead and groaned softly. Looking around, she thought, "This is my room? Why am I lying in bed?" She looked at her right hand, and until just a moment ago, it still felt warm. Arya looked at Fenrir sitting by the bed and asked, why am I?" Folding his arms, Fenrir replied, "You collapsed from overwork." Overwork, Arya recalled, the moment she had fallen at her desk. Lowering her head, she said, "I caused trouble. I am truly sorry." Resting his chin on one hand and looking away, Fenrir replied, "No," sitting on the bed. Arya looked at him and asked, Your Majesty, may I ask you something?" Arya gripped the edge of the blanket. Supporting his chin with his hand, Fenrir said, "What is it?" Hesitantly, Arya asked, "Earlier, were you touching my hand?" Fenrir was silent for a moment. What are you talking about? Panicking, Arya cried, I'm sorry, it was nothing. She mocked herself inwardly. Right? There's no way this man would do something like that. Suddenly, he leaned over and pressed a hand to Arya's shoulder. If you collapse again over something like this, it will be troublesome. Arya was pushed back onto the bed and stared up at the man so close to her. Your Majesty. Looking at Arya's hand, Fenrir said, rest for today. He took her hand, his fingertips lightly brushing across the back of it. Arya jerked upright and flung his hand away. Someone might see. Fenrir stared at her in silence, then reached out and grasped her wrist. In a low voice, Fenrir said, from now on, only in front of me. He gazed at Arya. I permit you to remove the ring. Arya froze, staring at the man before her, unable to speak. Fenrir released her wrist. His fingers slid down through her long hair, the strands slipping between them. Puzzled, Arya asked, what is that? Fenrir sat in the chair by the bed with his back partly turned to her and said nothing. Looking at Arya, Fenrir said, even if you possess a great deal of magic, continuously maintaining black hair and using a magical tool like that must be a burden on your body. He continued, if you keep fainting over and over, it will be troublesome. He stood up. By tomorrow morning, I'll have this room cleared out. Get some proper rest. Turning, Fenrir walked toward the door. Arya watched his back. So, when he mentioned the ring earlier, that was why? Lowering her head, she softly replied, all right, thank you very much. Fenrir stopped walking. From now on, come to my private dining room at mealtimes. Sitting on the bed, Arya looked at Fenrir's back in confusion. Turning his head slightly, he asked, do you understand? Arya suddenly came back to herself. Yes, I understand. Inwardly, she wondered what he meant by that. Isn't that where His Majesty usually takes his meals? Lowering his eyes slightly, Fenrir said, recover quickly, Arya. Arya stared in disbelief at the direction in which he left. The sound of the door closing echoed through the quiet bedroom. Alone on a large bed, Arya sat there blankly staring at the shut door. Then she suddenly pulled up the blanket, collapsed into the soft pillows, and buried her face deep in the bedding. Arya's mind was in complete chaos. What is going on? She reached up and lightly touched her cheek with her fingertips. He actually said my name just now. I don't really understand it, but if the rumors are true, he's supposed to be a cold and heartless man. She sat up again. Then there was no reason for him to come all the way here to see me, right? Arya raised a hand and lightly brushed her black hair with her fingertips. Normally, a hair color like this should be hated. Sitting at the edge of the bed, she sank into thought. But he doesn't seem to dislike black hair at all. Why is that? On the table lay the ring set with the blue gemstone. At the Gautier family estate in the neighboring kingdom of Elbir, Alice was sitting on a sofa with the Marchioness when the door opened and Abel walked in. Alice ran over to him. Grandfather. Abel looked at the Marchioness and said, oh, Victoria. Alice froze, making a confused sound. The Marchioness took Abel's arm and said, Father. Abel embraced the Marchioness and said, my daughter, I've missed you very much. The Marchioness replied, I've missed you as well. Looking at her, Abel continued, your room has been kept exactly as it was when you left. No matter whom you marry, you will always be a member of the Gautier family. You may return whenever you wish. The Marchioness nodded. Of course, to me, this is still the place where I feel most at ease. Alice was full of confusion. Even mothers like this too. Why? Stepping forward, Alice called out, Grandfather. Abel turned to look at her. HM, you are Alice? Because of your hair color, I didn't recognize you at first. Why are you here like that? The Marchioness looked at Alice and said, that's enough. Take off the ring. Alice replied, all right, mother. She removed the ring from her finger, and as soon as it came off, her long brown hair instantly returned to its dazzling gold. Alice revealed her true appearance. Looking at the change before him, Abel exclaimed, oh. The Marchioness went on, while you're at the Gautier house, you may take it off. Alice nodded. Understood. Abel lifted a lock of Alice's golden hair and said, how radiant it is. The Marchioness looked at Abel and said, I want to hear your thoughts on this matter, Father. Abel replied, I understand. Then let us speak somewhere else. Turning to Alice, the Marchioness said, Alice, stay here. Abel and the Marchioness turned and left together, leaving Alice standing alone in the corridor. Watching them go, she felt somewhat exasperated. Grandfather and mother are both making such a fuss over something as trivial as hair color. Alice walked to a mirror and looked at herself with her restored golden hair. My hair was always golden to begin with. She reached up and gently stroked the long strands hanging over her chest. That's right, this golden hair. is the real me. Suddenly, Alice let out a sharp cry. Ah! She clutched her head, trembling. Standing before the mirror, Alice stared at the reflection of her golden hair and fell into confusion. Grabbing her hair, Alice began breathing rapidly. She stared at the mirror in silence. In another room of the manor, Abel and the Marchioness sat facing one another. Abel laughed loudly and said, "Well done, Victoria." Raising his teacup, he continued, "I never expected that arrogant man would end up being fed a substitute. Serve him right." Looking into the reflection in her teacup, the Marchioness said, "Using a magical tool makes it much easier." But she set down her cup with a soft clink. The Marchioness continued, "I still haven't received a report from Arya, even though I told her many times to send one." Abel asked, "Is it possible that Arya herself has abandoned her duty?" The Marchioness replied, "That's impossible. She's nothing but a doll that obeys our orders." Marquis Bertrand had said, "Investigate His Majesty and report back. See whether His Majesty is truly as the rumors say, and what kind of things might lower his guard." The Marchioness stared ahead. "You are to investigate for Alice's sake." Arya had lowered her head and replied, "Yes, I understand." Seated on the sofa, Abel said, "In that case, they may already have realized she was a substitute." Sitting opposite him, the Marchioness replied, "As long as the ring is not removed, they will not notice. The magical power of black hair should be strong. Even if she doesn't remove the magic item for several days, there should be no negative effects. That girl Alice's magic is weak. It is difficult for her to wear the ring all day and maintain the disguise." Looking at Abel, the Marchioness asked, "There hasn't been any warning or punishment sent to the Bertrand family, has there?" Holding his teacup, Abel replied, "No, none at all. There has been no contact whatsoever." Setting the cup down, he said, "Then they must be observing your movements in secret." The Marchioness looked somewhat surprised. "Yes, that does seem the most natural conclusion." Abel continued, "The fact that they gave trade priority to the kingdom of Martell alone is enough to infuriate me. We had been watching that place all along, and yet that man dared to toy with my daughter with such shamelessness." Abel clenched his teeth, his face growing angry. Looking at him, the Marchioness said, "Father." Abel set down his teacup. "Word has also reached here that the king and queen of the kingdom of Brankel have arrived in Elber." He rose and walked to the window. Whether the rumors are true or not, it would be best not to act rashly for now. The Marchioness replied, "Understood, father." Turning back, Abel warned, "Listen carefully. Keep a close watch on their movements. If Arya contacts you, report it to me immediately." A cold smile appeared on Abel's face. Whether Arya and Alice have truly exchanged places or not, the current situation is an opportunity for us. The Marchioness looked at Abel's expression, slightly puzzled. Abel said to her, "Regrettable as it is, you should return to Brankel for now, and do not come here again for a while. Make sure Alice remains obedient as well. If she refuses to obey, locking her up is acceptable." Lowering her head, the Marchioness replied, "Yes, father." Alice grabbed a dress and tore it violently apart. "What is this? I've only just come back, and now I'm being told to return to my room immediately? Mother, this is too much." Alice paced furiously around the room. Father didn't even come to see his own daughter. Why do I have to suffer such humiliation? All of this is because of that person. Alice stopped moving and fell silent. Then the corners of her lips slowly curled upward into a cold smile. "I've thought of a wonderful idea." She walked to the window and pulled aside the heavy curtains. Alice pushed the window open and looked out. A meaningful smile appeared on her face. "Just wait, my dear sister." At the same time, back in the palace, a dining table was set with a lavish meal. Fresh fruit and steaming black tea filled the air with fragrance. Arya sat at the table, cutting her food with a knife and fork. In this situation, Arya paused with her utensils in hand and secretly glanced at the opposite end of the table. Fenrir was seated quietly there. Dressed in dark, elegant formal wear, he was sipping soup with refined composure. Arya looked at him. What is going on here? She had never expected that she would actually be sitting with him, sharing dinner. In the spacious dining room, Fenrir and Arya sat, facing one another, while attendants stood nearby in silence. From now on, come to my private dining room at mealtimes. Holding her fork, Arya thought, I never imagined we would really sit together and eat. She quietly lifted her gaze and observed the man across from her. Fenrir raised his teacup, his face utterly unreadable. Arya lowered her eyes again. He's completely expressionless. I can't tell what he's thinking at all. What is this situation? I'm so nervous I can hardly swallow. Fenrir looked at the plate in front of Arya, which she had barely touched, and said, It seems you haven't fully recovered yet. Arya blinked. Fenrir continued, You're eating very little. Flustered, Arya replied, And no, my body is perfectly fine. Staring at her, Fenrir asked, Then is the food not to your taste? Arya hurriedly denied it. No, not at all. Looking at Fenrir, she thought, I feel like he's pressing me about something. Your Majesty, what is it? Turning to Lisa behind him, Fenrir ordered, Prepare something else. Lisa bowed slightly and replied, Yes, Your Majesty. Arya was very surprised by what she saw. She quickly waved her hand. The food now is already very delicious. There's no need to prepare anything new. Fenrir stared at Arya in silence. The two of them looked at each other across the table. Then Fenrir said, Next time, I'll have them prepare things more suited to your taste. He folded his hands on the table. Tell the maids what you like. Looking at Fenrir, Arya said, All right, thank you very much. Arya looked at Fenrir. Could it be he's worried about me? And a few days ago, when I wasn't feeling well, he came to see me too. I really don't know what to do with that. Back in her room, Arya pressed a hand to her forehead and sighed. I've been tense ever since this morning. Now all the exhaustion is crashing down on me at once. There was a knock at the door. Startled, Arya replied, Yes, come in. The door opened, and Fenrir stood there. May I interrupt? Arya looked at him in surprise. Your Majesty? She quickly said, Yes, of course. Looking at the delicate pastries on the table, Arya asked, Your Majesty, what are these? Sitting across from her, Fenrir replied, As you can see, dessert. Arya blinked. I see. Thank you very much. She picked up a pastry. Then I'll have some. Arya took a bite and looked pleased. So delicious. After being busy all day, the sweetness is slowly sinking into my body. Fenrir silently watched her. Looking at him, Arya asked, Your Majesty, won't you have some too? Fenrir took a sip of tea and said, I do not like sweets. These were prepared especially for you, so don't worry about me. Eat as much as you like. Setting down the cup, he looked at Arya's fingers and continued, Take off the ring as well. It will be more comfortable. Obediently, Arya replied, All right. She removed the ring and set it on the table, then looked at Fenrir sitting before her. Ever since breakfast, I've been thinking, isn't the difference between the way he is now and the way he used to be a little too great? As she ate her sweets, Arya wrestled with her thoughts. Maybe I should just ask him directly. She paused and looked at Fenrir. Then Arya said, I'm very grateful for your consideration, but why are you suddenly being so kind to me? Fenrir was silent for a while. If you collapse somewhere without my knowledge, it will be troublesome. He averted his gaze and continued. Besides, if I send the attendants away, then you can return to black hair, can't you? Arya blinked and replied, Well, that is true. Lowering her head, she looked at the strands falling over her shoulders and asked, Your Majesty, don't you find black hair hateful? Fenrir's eyes widened sharply, and he went still. Arya sensed the atmosphere change. Oh no, I said the wrong thing. Looking at Fenrir's darkened expression, she thought, Did I make him angry? She lowered her head at once. I am terribly sorry. I spoke out of turn. Fenrir raised a hand to cover his forehead. No, my anger is not directed at you. Through his fingers, he looked at Arya. What I despise is the tradition itself, the tradition of hating black hair. Arya froze. What did you say? Fenrir was silent for a moment. My mother also had black hair. Arya stared at him in astonishment, unable to speak. Fenrir sank into memory. My mother was once a concubine, and at the time, the queen could not bear children. As the only child, I naturally became first in line to inherit the throne and was raised as the crown prince. On the surface, my mother received a certain degree of respect as the future king's mother. But behind her back, the disparaging remarks about her black hair never ceased. Those people smiled to her face, but bared their fangs behind her back and spat venomous curses. Since childhood, I've been surrounded by people like that. Arya, looked at Fenrir. So that's it. Is this why His Majesty trusts no one and always keeps his distance by acting cold and merciless? Lowering his eyes, Fenrir continued. The late king took my mother as a concubine, which means he did not harbor that same intense hatred for black hair. But clearly, he had no affection for her either. Arya asked softly, "You mean no affection for your mother?" Fenrir was silent for a moment, then replied, "I suspect he felt that way toward everyone." In a dim room, a young Fenrir sat alone on a tall stool, clutching a doll tightly in his arms. All around him was coldness and loneliness. Looking at the man before her, Arya unconsciously gripped the fabric of her clothing. Fenrir turned his gaze away and said, "It seems I have said too much. Enough of these foolish topics." Looking at Arya, he added, "In any case, no one has reason or need to grieve over their own hair color. That includes you as well." Arya lowered her head. "That's right, being judged and criticized over something you cannot control." Looking at Fenrir, she thought, has he suffered the same kind of pain too? Fenrir stood up. "I'll be going now." Arya looked at his retreating back, still dazed. Fenrir stopped walking. "Before you sleep, you'd best smooth out the crease between your brows." Arya froze, then instinctively raised a hand to her forehead. The door shut softly with a click. Arya stared at the closed door for a long time, without moving. Standing before the desk, an attendant respectfully said, "Your Majesty, I believe the time for this year's visit to Vanir is approaching. How would you like the schedule arranged?" Fenrir set down the document in his hand. "Has it already come to that time? Make it 3 weeks from now." The attendant nodded. "Understood." After hesitating, he asked, "Then, will Her Majesty the Queen accompany you as well?" Fenrir fell silent. In his mind appeared the image of Arya sleeping peacefully. Lowering his eyes, he replied coolly, "No, I will go alone." Arya looked at the abundant food on the table and asked, "A trip to the kingdom of Vanir?" Raising his teacup, Fenrir said, "I leave in 3 weeks." Setting down her teacup, Arya asked, "I don't need to accompany you?" "I'm sure that's what the annual schedule said." Fenrir replied, "It is an annual right. There is no need for you to go with me." Sitting in her chair, Arya thought, this will be the first time His Majesty won't be in the palace. As Fenrir drank his tea, he said, "At most about 10 days. I will issue instructions to ensure you suffer no inconvenience during that time. If you wish to be alone, simply dismiss the others." Arya replied, "All right, thank you very much." Looking at Fenrir, she thought, as I expected, the way he treats me now really is different. Inside the Bertrand residence, Alice was filled with resentment. How long do father and mother intend to keep me shut up? They say I'm allowed to leave my room now, but if I still can't step outside the house, what difference does it make? She stopped in front of a door. The time for King Fenrir to leave for Vanir's annual rite is close. Alice was just about to push the door open when she suddenly stopped. She noticed sounds coming from inside and pressed herself to the crack, listening carefully. Seated on a sofa, Count Bertrand said, "It seems he will go alone this year, as usual." The Countess nodded. "Yes, but it's strange. Why isn't Arya accompanying him?" Hidden behind the door, Alice listened in and heard good news. If Lord Fenrir leaves the palace, then that thing will be left there alone. That failed substitute needs to be punished. A few days later, there was a knock at the door. Count Bertrand opened it and looked at Alice, who was sitting by the window reading a book. Walking in, he said, "You seem to be in a good mood today. I heard you wanted to see me." Closing the book in her hands, Alice replied, "Father." Pointing to the stack of books on the table, she continued, "I've already finished all of these." Looking at the books, Count Bertrand said, "Oh, I see. I'll bring you some more. Is there anything in particular you'd like to read?" Sitting in her chair, Alice replied, "I don't mind following your recommendations, Father." She placed a hand on one of the books. "But besides reading, I'd also like something else to pass the time." Count Bertrand asked, "What would you like? Dresses? Jewelry?" Smiling, Alice replied, "I certainly would like to see dresses and jewelry. But besides that, I would also like some magical tools made for children to play with." Marquis Bertrand frowned at the pile of magical tools. Alice smiled and said, "They're just toy-like little gadgets. When I was young, I had lots of shiny, pretty things like these. I used to play with them all the time. So, may I relive those memories, Father?" Marquis Bertrand thought for a moment before replying, all right. If they're just tools for children to play with, it should be fine. I'll call in a magic item merchant." Alice said happily, "Thank you. I love you most of all, Father." Marquis Bertrand turned and left the room. Alice watched his back, a sly smile appearing on her face. "I really do love you, Father." In the palace tea room, an exquisite strawberry cake and black tea were set on the table. Looking at the cake, Arya thought, huh? He actually brought cake today. She turned to Fenrir beside her and asked, Your Majesty, are you feeding me? Holding his teacup, Fenrir asked in return, Do you have a problem with me feeding you? Arya looked at him and thought to herself, Does this man only have two settings? Kill me or dote on me? Fenrir took a sip of tea and said, You always say such strange things. Honestly, as Arya, you never failed to keep me entertained. Holding her teacup, Arya thought, Does he think I'm some kind of pet? Fenrir drank his tea, lost in thought. Back then, she had been like a doll, but now, the image of Arya as she once was surfaced in his mind. Could a person really change this much? Noticing something off about him, Arya set down her cup and asked, Your Majesty, is something wrong? Fenrir came back to himself. No, it's nothing. He took out an elegant jewelry box and said, Anyway, I came today to give you this. Arya looked at him in surprise. Fenrir continued, Give me your hand. Arya held out both hands, and Fenrir placed the jewelry box in her palms. Cradling the box, Arya looked at him hesitantly. Sitting on the sofa, Fenrir said, Open it. Arya replied, All right. When Arya opened the box, inside lay a brooch set with a huge red gemstone. Sitting beside her, Fenrir said, When I'm not around, make sure you wear it. Arya asked in confusion, Huh? Fenrir turned his head away and replied, Just think of it as a good luck charm. Looking at the brooch, Arya repeated softly, Good luck charm. Then she smiled at Fenrir. I understand. Thank you. Fenrir urged, Tried on. Arya picked up the brooch and replied, All right. She fastened the red gemstone brooch to her chest. It's beautiful. Looking at her, Fenrir said, It suits you. Arya froze and stared at him in surprise. Fenrir looked away and asked, What kind of expression is that? Arya hurriedly replied, And no, it's nothing. She gently touched the red gem at her chest. She fell silent. Fenrir gazed at her, but what surfaced in his mind was a cold image, a blood-red memory of a blade slicing across a throat, blood splattering over a gem of that same red. Arya suddenly came back to herself and realized Fenrir was leaning toward her. She gasped, Wait. Fenrir, expression grave, stared at her without a word. Arya looked at the face so close to hers, her heart in chaos. What? He's way too close. She cried out, Hold on, what is happening? Fenrir moved closer to Arya. He reached out, his fingertips touching her neck. Arya shut her eyes, and Fenrir watched her. Fenrir withdrew his hand and said, It seems the wound has healed. Arya blinked, stunned. Huh? Fenrir stood up and said, Get some rest. I'll be going too. Watching his back, Arya thought, Was that supposed to be our first night? Looking at him as he left, Arya said, All right, good night. The door closed, leaving Arya standing alone in the room. That sudden touch had completely flustered her. She lowered her gaze to the ruby brooch on her chest. Come to think of it, this was the first gift she had ever received from someone. Arya walked to the window, recalling the past. In her original world, she had always been a burden to her relatives. Her parents had both died in an accident when she was young, leaving her all alone. Sitting in the dark with a pair of scissors, Arya had cut off her own long hair. By the time she realized it, she had already begun drifting from one relative's house to another. At her parents' funeral, black and white portraits sat in the memorial hall as relatives gathered around young Arya and argued. One man shouted, Taking in this child? Absolutely impossible. Another woman pointed at Arya and said, What else can we do? I already have elders to care for. I don't want to take on a child too. Hugging a doll, Arya stood in the middle and listened to those cruel excuses. Later, as she grew older, she still never fit in with her surroundings. Whether she was walking through school in uniform or facing those cold-hearted adults, she always kept her head down and moved alone through the shadows. During those days, Arya buried herself in books. Sitting in a corner of the library, she turned the pages of the book in her hands. Those unrealistic fantasy novels let her forget everything around her, if only for a while. Before she could even register joy or excitement, Arya had already immersed herself completely in the story. Whenever she opened a book, even if only as an observer, she felt as though she had found a place where she belonged. Looking at herself in the mirror, Arya thought that although their circumstances and worlds were different, she and the original Arya might have been very alike. She reached out and touched the mirror. Back then, she had no allies and nowhere to belong. She could only keep covering up that cruel reality. Sometimes, After only a few months, she would be sent off to the next relative's house. Through all that constant moving around, she was always alone. Young Arya stood in the middle of a crowd, surrounded by the indifferent backs of adults. Arya recalled the past. Her parents had eloped because their marriage was opposed, and perhaps that was why the burden placed on her had been especially heavy. Every relative's household was the same. In front of others, they always acted noble and righteous, claiming they had taken in a pitiful relative's child who had lost her parents. A middle-aged woman replied with a smile, "Oh, is that what you think? This poor child, her parents died in an accident. The rest of the family all thought she was a burden, and no one wanted to take care of her, so she ended up at our house." A neighbor sighed, "That's truly admirable. Not everyone could do that. I really respect you." Standing off to the side with her school bag, Arya listened to those hypocritical conversations. In truth, outright indifference would have been easier to bear than that kind of false kindness. At home, the master of the house pointed at Arya, who was working, and shouted, "At the very least, we keep you fed and clean." Arya knelt on the floor, wiping it down in silence, enduring it all. Arya recalled her former self, the girl whose long hair had been forcibly cut off by her relatives. Perhaps it was precisely because they were so alike that she had become the Arya she was now. In front of the mirror, the Arya of two different worlds pressed their foreheads together, hands overlapping, as if completing some kind of union across time. Arya pressed her lips together, then raised both hands and patted her cheeks. Pulling herself together, she said, "I can't keep making that gloomy face anymore." She stood up, clenched her fist, and said firmly, "From now on, I can only live as Arya." Arya looked out the window. "At least now, I'm not just a burdensome child anymore. As the queen, I should be of some use, right?" Still uncertain, she murmured to herself, "Right?" She took a deep breath. "It's okay. At least they'll think I have value in staying here." Arya clenched her fist. "As long as I still have value, no one should suddenly press a sword to my neck." Fenrir appeared in her mind, sword in hand, staring ahead with cold eyes. "I really want to believe. That won't happen." Arya closed her eyes, lost in thought. Fenrir holding Alice's hand. Arya looked at the ruby on her chest. "As for His Majesty, I want to know more about him." Sunlight spilled over the grand palace buildings, and inside a room was an array of exquisite ornaments and dolls. A middle-aged man said to Alice, "Look here. I know you like beautiful things, Alice, so I prepared all of these especially for you." Looking at the gifts before her, Alice exclaimed, "Wow, which one should I choose?" The man patted her head and said, "I have work to attend to, so stay here and pick whatever you like." Alice replied, "Thank you, father." Watching him leave, the smile gradually vanished from Alice's face, her gaze turning cold and deep. She looked at the attendant beside her and asked, "Hey, which one here is the most expensive?" The attendant looked at her hesitantly. "You don't have to choose, just one. I'll buy that one and give it to you. But in exchange, I want you to prepare something for me." The attendant asked uneasily, "Is that really all right? Does your father know about this?" Alice pressed a finger to her lips. "Keep it a secret from father. If you do as I say, I'll take even better care of you from now on. See? That's not a bad bargain, is it?" After a moment of silence, the attendant said, "I understand, my lady. Then, what is it you want?" Alice leaned close to the attendant's ear and whispered her request. A few days later, the attendant came before Alice again, holding an elegant wooden box. He offered it to her and said, "My lady, what do you think of this?" Alice took the box, opened it, and smiled with satisfaction at what lay inside. Holding the ornate wooden box, Alice said, "Thank you very much. I'll be counting on you from now on." After bowing, the attendant left. Standing behind the curtains, Alice watched his retreating figure. She reached out and drew the curtain shut. The room sank into darkness. Standing alone in the shadows, Alice hugged the wooden box tightly and murmured, "Now, everything is ready." The corners of her lips curled up in an unfathomable smile. Arya raised her teacup and asked, "The garden behind the palace?" Standing beside the long table, Lisa replied, "Yes." She looked at Arya and continued, "You've been busy with official duties lately. I thought a change of scenery might do you good. The back garden is truly beautiful. I'm sure you'll like it too." Arya looked out the window and said, "You're right. The weather is lovely today. Maybe I should go take a look." As Arya lifted her cup, Lisa smiled and suggested, "In that case, Your Majesty, why not have His Majesty show her the way?" Arya paused and looked at Fenrir beside her. Fenrir was holding his teacup. Arya asked in surprise, "And me?" Then she looked at him and continued, "His Majesty?" Sunlight poured over the neatly trimmed royal garden. White doves skimmed above layered greenery and hedge mazes, while the fountain at the center sent water echoing through the courtyard. Amid the blooming flowers, Arya stood by the terrace, taking in the view. Walking at her side, Fenrir asked, "Is this your first time seeing this place up close?" Arya smiled and replied, "Yes. Before, I'd only seen it from afar a few times from inside the palace, but this is my first time coming to this side of the garden." Looking ahead, Fenrir said, "I see. Then let's go." The two of them slowly descended along the path. Fenrir held out his hand, palm up, and stopped it in front of Arya. Confused, Arya stared at the gesture. Fenrir sighed. "Where did all the etiquette you learned before disappear to?" Arya froze in place. Fenrir simply took her hand, her heart filled with astonishment. Since when did escorting someone become this kind of thing? Fenrir led her forward by the hand. "My apologies," Arya said softly. "Thank you for helping me." The two walked side by side along a flower-lined path. Arya thought to herself, "I never imagined a walk in the garden with His Majesty would turn out like this." She recalled the scene from not long ago, when she had asked Lisa for advice. She had never expected things to develop into this. Time rewound to a little earlier indoors. Arya asked, "Lisa, may I ask you something?" Lisa replied, "Of course." Hesitating, Arya continued, "If you want to get to know someone more deeply, what would you do?" Lisa smiled meaningfully and asked, "Could it be that you mean His Majesty?" Arya jolted upright and protested, "It's not like that." "All right." Lowering her head, she continued, "Lately, I feel like he's become much gentler, or rather, sometimes he gives off that kind of feeling." The faster she spoke, the more flustered she became. "No, that's not it. It's just that, as queen, I feel I ought to know more about him. Like, what foods he likes, for example." Watching Arya panic, Lisa laughed inwardly. The queen's flustered side is truly adorable. Gently, Lisa replied, "I can tell you everything I know, but I think the best choice would be to speak with him directly." Calming down, Arya said, "You're right. I should ask him myself." Lisa smiled at her and said, "If you've decided, then leave the arrangements to me." Seated at a round table in the garden, Arya looked at Fenrir across from her and thought, "I never imagined Lisa's plan would be to suggest it directly to His Majesty." Fenrir looked at Arya, his gaze falling on the ornament at her chest. "You're wearing it already." Arya replied, "Yes." In a soft voice, she said, "This is the first gift I've ever received." Touching the red gem at her chest, Arya added, "I'm really happy." Fenrir gazed at her, sinking into thought, seeing her so pleased. "Why does that make me feel so pleased too?" Arya spoke up. May I ask you something?" Fenrir replied, "What is it?" Looking at him, Arya continued, "Your Majesty, what do you like?" Fenrir fell silent. Looking at Arya's earnest expression, he was full of confusion. Where did a question like that come from? Is this some kind of trap? Waving her hands, Arya said, "No, sorry. Let me put it another way. For example, what's your favorite color?" Fenrir looked aside and thought, "My favorite color? If I had to choose one, I suppose it would be cool tones. To be honest, I've never really thought about something like that." Arya silently took note. Cool tones, like blue, just like His Majesty's eyes. "I'll remember that." Then came the sound of fluttering wings, and a pale violet bird landed on the table. Arya gasped, "Wow." The little bird stood on the tablecloth, tilting its head at her. Arya reached out and lightly brushed its soft feathers with her fingertips. "You're not afraid of people at all, are you? You're so cute." Arya gently scooped up the bird from the table. It affectionately pecked at her fingertips. Sitting across from her, Fenrir quietly watched the scene. Arya noticed his gaze. "What?" Fenrir looked away. "Nothing. I was just thinking that you'd make that kind of expression." "Over a bird." Arya looked confused. "Over a bird?" She looked at Fenrir before her. "Come to think of it, in the past, because I was always so tense, I never noticed." Arya looked into Fenrir's eyes. In those clear, jewel-like eyes, her own reflection was visible. Arya thought to herself, "They're really beautiful." Fenrir quietly held her gaze. Beneath the pavilion bathed in the glow of the setting sun, the little bird on the table spread its wings and flew off toward the woods. A single feather drifted slowly down. Fenrir calmly watched its descent. Arya seemed a little dazed. Fenrir stood and said, "We should head back. The sun will be setting soon." Arya rose as well. "Yes, I suppose so." A small sense of reluctance welled up inside Arya. "But I want to talk with him a little longer." Fenrir turned to leave, and Arya hurriedly called out, "Your Majesty." Arya asked. If you have time in the future, could we talk in the garden like this again? Fenrir turned his head slightly and looked at Arya, bathed in the evening light. He withdrew his gaze. Of course, if I happen to be in the mood. The corners of Fenrir's lips lifted slightly in a faint smile. The golden dusk spread across the whole palace, stretching their shadows long. A few days later, the day finally came for Fenrir to depart for the kingdom of Vanir. Horses had already been prepared at the manor gates. Fenrir was stroking his horse's back when Arya approached with Lisa at her side. Arya looked at the size of the entourage and asked, "Aren't there too few guards and attendants for a send-off?" Fenrir turned and replied, "I don't like making a spectacle of things. The fewer people I have with me, the freer I am to move." Arya looked at him. He may be the ruler of a nation, yet he acts like this, though it does suit his majesty perfectly. Fenrir stepped closer to Arya and lowered his head to speak near her ear. Even the palace is not absolutely safe. And there's also the matter of the Bertrand family. While I'm away, something unexpected may happen. Arya listened as Fenrir continued, "Stay vigilant." Arya nodded. "I understand. Thank you for worrying about me. The Bertrand family is still a marquee house. Even if they really wanted to do something, I don't think they would make too much of a scene." Fenrir looked at Arya and said, "If that logic held true, you wouldn't have ended up in the palace in the first place." Arya replied quietly, "That's true." Fenrir withdrew his gaze and turned toward his horse. Arya stood where she was, watching his back. Fenrir halted. "You may relax a little, but don't overdo it." Arya watched him leave and thought, "He saw right through me." Mounting his horse, Fenrir added, "If anything happens, send word to me at once." Arya replied, "Yes, your majesty." From atop his horse, Fenrir looked down at her. "I'm leaving." Arya waved him off from the manor gate. Sunlight streamed through the high windows onto the red carpet. Lisa walked behind Arya as Arya looked ahead and sighed. With his majesty gone, the palace feels much emptier. This place is astonishingly huge, though she felt a little lonely aside from that. Arya smiled to herself, secretly delighted. Finally, I have my own time again. I don't have to stay tense every second. This feels so relaxing. How should I use all this free time? Walking at her side, Lisa said, "Oh, by the way, your majesty, what did you think of the garden the other day?" Arya stopped and replied, "I loved it. I had a wonderful time there, and I talked with His Majesty about many things." She sank into thought. "Right, I want to give him something in return to thank him for the brooch." Arya touched the ornament at her chest. "I don't know what would make a good return gift." She turned to Lisa and asked, "Lisa, I want to thank His Majesty for the brooch he gave me. What do you think I should give him?" After thinking for a moment, Lisa replied, "Let me see. I think His Majesty would be happy with anything you gave him." Arya thought with some frustration. Anything is the hardest answer of all. I think he likes simple things more than flashy ornaments. Lisa smiled and nodded. Arya replied, "Thank you. I'll think along those lines." Lost in thought, Arya considered it. Something he can use every day might be good. He said he likes cool colors. Maybe I could embroider a handkerchief. Lisa looked at Arya. "Seeing you and His Majesty getting along so well makes me very happy too." Arya stopped walking and recalled the time they first met. Though at first, he really was frightening. Back then, his words were so cold that I thought he was a truly terrifying person. Lisa looked at Arya and said, "But now, from the way you two talk, I can sense His Majesty's own particular kind of gentleness." Arya smiled. When did that change begin? She thought back to that night. After she had collapsed from overwork, Fenrir had taken her hand and slipped a ring onto her finger. Looking at him in surprise, Arya had said, "Your Majesty." Looking at her, Fenrir had told her, "You may only remove this ring in front of me." Arya had asked in confusion, "Huh? What?" Fenrir explained, "Even with the magic tool, keeping your black hair disguised all the time puts a strain on your body. If you keep feigning like this, it will be troublesome for me." Looking at him, Arya thought, I don't know whether those words were sincere, but I'm sure he was caring for me in his own way. She stepped out through the palace doors and onto the terrace, resting her hands on the railing. Looking into the distance, Arya recalled how she had felt at the very beginning. Back then, I was burning with determination, thinking I had to prove I had value. I absolutely couldn't be killed. Standing on the terrace, Arya thought to herself, of course, I really did give it my all in every way, but A white bird landed on the railing with a clear chirp. Arya held out her hand, and the bird lightly hopped onto her fingertip. Arya remembered the past. At that time, she had always been cautious, awkward under Fenrir's gaze. He had always watched her with a scrutinizing look as she navigated social settings. Arya thought, His Majesty has been acknowledging my efforts in his own way all along. She closed her eyes and remembered that moment. That was the first time he called me by my name. In that instant, she felt something she had never felt before. Thinking back now, from the very beginning, he had already seen me as an independent person. And now, I can feel that he is treating me as Arya. Looking at the white bird, she closed her eyes. I don't remember whether the novel ever described His Majesty's past, but I'm certain he has always lived as himself. And right now, I too am Arya. I can truly feel that I'm spending this time together with His Majesty. The white bird spread its wings and flew away. Watching it go into the distance, Arya said softly, "It's gone." She stared up at the empty sky as a few feathers drifted slowly down. Arya thought to herself, I thought being alone would feel easier, but before His Majesty returns, I need to prepare his gift. Lifting her skirt, Arya ran down the corridor. Beside a stream in the mountains, Fenrir's party had stopped to rest. The horses were drinking by the water while the attendants busied themselves checking the luggage. Fenrir walked to his mount, grabbed the saddle, and prepared to climb on. The moment he put his weight on it, the sound of leather snapping rang out sharply. The saddle strap had suddenly broken at the root. Fenrir lost his support and swayed. Looking at the broken strap in his hand, he showed a flash of surprise. One attendant rushed over and shouted, "Your Majesty, are you hurt?" Fenrir steadied himself and replied, "I'm fine." The attendant took the broken tack and examined the cut carefully. How strange. We thoroughly inspected all the equipment before departure. A strap of this quality shouldn't just break like this in the middle of the journey. Fenrir stared at the snapped leather. Something like this had never happened before. His eyes fixed on the neat yet worn break, and a trace of unease rose in his heart. Night cloaked the distant palace. A young officer stopped and looked toward the brightly lit building. "We'll escort you only this far. If we get any closer, it will arouse suspicion." Alice stood nearby in a black cloak. Turning to her, the officer asked, "How exactly do you plan to sneak in?" Alice smiled faintly and replied, "That's only my stand-in." The officer froze as Alice's figure gradually dissolved into black mist. Alice appeared in one of the palace corridors. Leaning against the wall, she panted and said, "No one told me this would be so exhausting." She lowered her eyes to the ruby in her hand. "This thing can't move me very far at all. Just how many times do they expect me to use it?" "Whatever." Alice tore off her cloak and casually tossed it into a flower bed. "Now that I'm here, I don't need this piece of trash anymore." Standing before a patch of blue roses, she stared ahead with a cold expression. Alice walked through the empty hallway in high heels, the sound of her steps echoing through the stillness of the night. Ahead, a maid cleaning the corridor came into view. Alice stopped and said, "You there?" The maid startled and immediately lowered her head respectfully. "Yes, what are your orders, Your Majesty?" Alice looked at the maid before her. "Your Majesty, that has a rather nice ring to it. I just took a walk in the garden, but I'm still not used to how the palace looks at night. Take me back to my room." Bowing, the maid said, "Yes, of course. Please come this way." Following behind the maid, Alice thought, "See, no one has noticed anything strange." The maid led the way and said, "Please go straight, then turn right. I'm not permitted to go any farther, so I'll have to leave you here. Will that be all right?" Alice turned her head slightly and replied, "Thank you. This is fine. Of course it's easy, because I am the true mistress of this place." Standing alone by the window, Alice thought, "This is almost disappointingly easy." Late at night, Arya sat on the sofa reading a letter. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. Arya set down the letter and looked toward the door, thinking in confusion. Who could it be at this hour? Maybe it's Lisa. She stood, walked to the door, and gripped the handle. She slowly pulled the door open. Through the narrow gap, a cold eye appeared. Arya's eyes widened in terror. She instinctively stepped back. Alice abruptly shoved the door open and entered the room, slamming it shut behind her. She stood before the door, looking at the startled Arya, a cold smile on her face. Alice barged into the room. Arya backed away in fear, slipped, and fell to the floor. Alice looked down at Arya and said, "I'm so glad to see you're doing so well, sister. Or should I call you Your Majesty the Queen?" Arya said nothing. Alice bent down and moved closer. Still as quiet as ever, aren't you? No letters, no message, nothing. And yet you've been living in comfort all this time. You're enjoying this imposter's life, aren't you? She suddenly reached out and grabbed Arya's hair. How long exactly are you planning to keep this hair color? Alice forcibly yanked the ring from Arya's hand. The ring was ripped off roughly and fell onto the carpet with a dull sound. Arya was shoved to the floor. Alice crouched over her and pressed Arya's shoulders down hard. I'm the only blonde, Alice. Hurry up and give it back to me. You have no right to be happy. Leaning close to Arya's face, Alice snarled through clenched teeth, a black-haired thing like you belongs writhing in misery. Listening to those vicious curses, Arya remembered her former self, curled up in a dark corner, covered in bruises, enduring everything in silence. She had suffered enough of that pain already. Arya opened her eyes. Even if I have black hair, I still have a right to be happy. Struggling, she shoved Alice's hand away and shouted, "Let go of me, Alice." Alice froze, staring at the woman before her in disbelief. Lying on the floor, Arya reached toward the ring that had fallen in the distance. Her fingertips touched the cold metal. She clenched the ring tightly, her eyes turning sharp. Furious, Alice demanded, "Did you just call me by my name? Without even using honorifics? Who do you think you're talking to?" She suddenly seized Arya's long hair again. Arya groaned in pain. Alice burst into wild laughter. "Oh, this is just too good. You don't actually think you're the queen now, do you?" She tightened her grip, yanking Arya's hair. "With that disgusting black hair of yours?" Arya's cheek pressed against the cold floor as she silently endured the agonizing pain in her scalp. In her eyes glimmered something dark. Seeing that look, Alice demanded angrily, "What kind of look is that? Answer me." Calmly, Arya looked at her and asked, "Do you hate me because my hair is black?" Alice froze in place. Arya continued, "If my hair weren't black." Alice suddenly yanked her hair and roared, "If it weren't black, then what? Whether your hair is black or gold, I'd hate you all the same. Something as gloomy as you will forever be nothing more than my substitute doll." Arya replied softly, "Even if that were true." Alice leaned close, mocking her. "Huh? What did you say? I can't hear you." Arya's eyes flew open. "Even if I once was a substitute, I'm not a doll anymore." A powerful surge of magic erupted from Arya, and brilliant light exploded through the room, completely sweeping away every shadow. Alice was stunned by the sudden power, staggering back, her face filled with shock and confusion.
All the noble guests present continually discussed the girl who appeared in a provocative outfit. She looked so unusual and attractive that absolutely no one could take their eyes off her. Feeling all this excessive attention, she turned her gaze directly to those